Thank you, Representative Key. That was fantastic. All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Chalie Meadows of Oath Pact.
I was actually just asked a few minutes ago if I would speak, so I don't have a prepared text. I'm going to have to speak from my heart, if you don't mind. Today I'm hearing the term, the right of return, and it's in reference to the right of the Palestinian people to return to that land. Well, I want to tell you something. I believe in the right of return for the nation of Israel to be able to be returned to their land, which occurred in 1948 as they obtained a nation at that point in time. I don't know how many of you know this, but that land was not always their land. When God displaced the inhabitants of that land and gave that land to Israel, it had been inhabited by the Jebusites. And I don't know if you know anything about them, but the Jebusites worshiped the god Moloch. And Moloch was like a big, I don't know if it's brass or gold cow, and in the side of its belly was an open spot. And they would build a huge fire on the backside of Moloch. And they would worship their firstborn children to the god of Moloch. And God saw that as a sin. And He took that land away from those people, and He gave that land to the children of Israel. Yes. I wonder what we do today when we also worship a similar form of Moloch, and we sacrifice some of our firstborn through abortion for the convenience and the opportunity for prosperity later on, so we don't have to be burdened with a little child. So I would just suggest to America, you better pay attention to that one too. Because you see, the children of Israel sinned and they were displaced out of that land. But there was a promise that God would bring them back, and they're back today. One of the things that upsets me so much today is people cannot discern who the good guys and the bad guys are over there. I call it the action and reaction. For example, just a few days ago, there was a lot of carnage in Israel among some of the Jewish people from the rockets that attacked. So Israel answers back with fighters and destroying some of those that were shooting the rockets. And what does the world and the world press do? They blame Israel. And all they're doing is responding to the attacks of the enemies of Israel. Last Thursday, I was involved in a briefing with a representative from the Consulate of Israel out of Houston, the Consulate out of Houston. And one of the things we are informed is probably on September 15th, the Palestinians will go to the Security Council and they will request that there be a nation, a Palestinian nation created. And they've had assurances from the United States, and I hope and pray that they stand with that, because the United States is a member of the Security Council, that they will veto that, and all it takes is one nation to veto it. Should that occur, and I think it will occur, because the Obama administration has an election coming up, and unfortunately far too many of the Jewish citizens in America are liberals and support people like Obama. It will be a smaller number this time, I guarantee you, after he tried to throw Israel under the bus when Benjamin Netanyahu was here. And thank God for a leader like Netanyahu, who's 10 times smarter than our president, and exposed him for what he is. But the next move, expected 5 days later on the 20th of September, is they will take the resolution to the UN General Assembly. And unfortunately, we were informed last Thursday, they probably have the votes in the General Assembly to create a nation of Palestine. The problem with this, folks, this is not a negotiated event. There are no lines drawn on where this new nation will be. If, as Charles Key said, Representative Key said, if it wants to go back, if they want to go back to its original boundaries, where the widest part of Israel would be, I think, 12 miles wide. That is indefensible. And the splitting of Jerusalem is indefensible. That cannot occur. So what will happen? This guy said, I don't know what will happen. I'm going to tell you, folks, it could get really dicey. Who knows what will happen? But what we said is, I believe as Nicole said, we must pray. And I would suggest also that you might contact the administration, contact one of the numbers for the president, and contact him and urge him to stand with Israel in this thing. I think the Jewish vote will be very important to his re-election, so I don't think he'll double-cross him. But we need to see him stand there. I was privileged to go to Israel in 1980. And one of the things that was so remarkable, and people that have been recently tell me, I wouldn't recognize the country today. But one of the things that I was so amazed was how much progress had been made in taking a land that was primarily desolate, that many Arabs cared so little about. They actually sold the property to Jewish people that would want to move back there. So by the time 1947 comes along, 48 comes along, Jews already had purchased and owned a great deal of the land in what we see today as Israel. I don't mean to say they owned it all, but they owned a lot of it. But it was amazing. They called it the reclamation of the land, and they had gone through, and every year, like in Oklahoma, years ago, we used to let out in rural areas, let all the kids out for cotton pulling in the wintertime for a couple of weeks. They'd go and pull cotton. They needed farm hands to bring in the crop. Well, in Israel, they'd let the schools out for 2 weeks. You know what they did? They planted trees. And in 1980, we saw forests of all different ages that were growing and even beginning to propagate themselves. We could see in the Jordan River Valley there, where the Jordan River ran into the Dead Sea, on the east side of that was the nation of Jordan. On the west side of that was Israel. On the west side, you saw beautifully manicured crops. You saw all types of perfectionist agriculture. On the east side, desolation. It is amazing what they've been able to do. In 1948, when that became a nation, what Israel had was 1% of the landmass in the Middle East that had been controlled by the Arabs. And the Arab Muslim world was not satisfied with 99%. They wanted even more. And they want to drive the Jews into the ocean, into the sea. It is so difficult to negotiate and deal with people as an illusion and a hope for peace when you continually give away land, give away your security and all. Folks, the Jews' back is to the sea. They cannot give away more and more and more. We saw the Golan Heights there. For those of you that don't know, prior to the 67 war, the Syrians used to sit on the Golan Heights and they would pour rockets into the Hula Valley, into the kibbutzes, day and night, pouring rockets in. In that 67 war, some very bloody fighting and what was thought to be an almost impossible, let's say, bluff to ascend. The Israeli soldiers were successful, and they drove the Syrians off of that. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War, Israel was totally asleep during that. The Russians had armed Syria to the teeth. And when that attack occurred, it was probably the greatest concentration of armament and men any place in the history of warfare. And the Jewish people were driven off of that again. They retook it, and they swore never to give it up again. Let's hope that their political people don't lose the backbone they need to keep it. We need to pray for Israel. I would urge you also to contact your federal elected officials and the President and urge them to stand with Israel. Thank you so much.
Well, let's give another hand of applause for Chalie Meadows. Thank you so much.